Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. It is going to remain fairly mild and dry over the next couple of days, but into the weekend, the start of next working week, it is going to be turning much colder as we do see northerly winds arriving through Saturday into Sunday, as I said, bringing cold, if not very cold air for the whole of the British Isles. Now, along with that, there is going to be the risk of snow, and in today's video we'll look at the latest GFS, GM, ECMWF and the Ensembles, not only looking at the synoptic charts, looking at the raw data, but also have a look at some of the precipitation charts. We've hinted at it a little bit over the past few days, but I thought today would be a good opportunity to have a look at it in a little bit more detail. Again, no concrete facts at this stage. The three runs that we're going to have a look at all do have slightly different scenarios, but all do show pretty widespread wintry precipitation. Doesn't mean we're going to be buried in snow next week, but it does mean there is a high chance in quite a few places to at least see a few flakes, maybe even some settling snow for some as well. And of course, we'll touch on all of that in a few moments' time. So do remember, if you enjoy the videos, much do like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in description. Now just quickly start on the live radar, just to give an update what is going on right at the moment. Recording this around 7:30 on Wednesday evening, and you can see not too much going on, very quiet, very mundane, but as I said, that's all going to be changing through this weekend. It's been very dry the last couple of weeks. Not only is, as I said, it's going to turn cold next week, it's going to turn pretty unsettled. Lots of wintry showers. It's one of those traditional northerly winds where we do see lots of convection taking place. Again, it will be favoured for northern areas and areas facing coasts, but probably just inland, not immediately on the coast. As we stated in the past few videos, those generally mild sea surface temperatures will aid convection, aid potential snow showers forming, but they will probably keep those temperatures above freezing and above sort of 3-4 degrees, which is kind of the max temperature you need for snow near coastal regions. So if you are right on the coast, it is going to be a bit tricky just because it is so early on in the year, but you come maybe 5-10 miles inland, there is a pretty high chance of wintry precipitation. If you look at the temperatures at the moment, you can see it is generally average conditions at the moment. Some mild conditions further north as we've got a bit more trapped cloud. Further southwards, a little bit chillier tonight. And you see much of Europe under the higher pressure is starting to see those temperatures cool down. Of course, over the weekend, this is a few days ago, we saw that transition from mild, gloomy high pressure to more of a drier, colder, higher pressure with less in the way of cloud. We have still seen plenty of cloud around, just more breaks in that cloud with a bit of sunshine breaking through. And that has meant that generally conditions have been a little bit chillier this week, but nowhere near as cold as they'll get next week. Now, if you do go over to the latest UKV and have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the coming days, you can see as we head into Thursday, still plenty of cloud around, but some of that cloud breaking through the afternoon. But it's the last kind of properly gloomy day there on Thursday. As you can see into Friday, we start to see that transition towards colder conditions. Precipitation starts to arrive in the north. It's not cold yet, but behind that band of heavy showers across northern Scotland, that is the Arctic air slowly arriving. And that slowly moves southwards through Saturday, clearing southern England through Saturday evening, and it's into Sunday we see that cold air arriving. Now through Saturday evening, snow showers in a few spots across Scotland, but nothing too major yet, as those winds aren't that strong, but they get much stronger. You can see normally, or initially at least, snow over the higher ground, but it could become to more low-lying areas into Sunday. But then look what happens. We see this small area of low pressure developing. Again, a small little system, a little area of instability, and you can see this little kink in the isobars, this really small areas of low pressure, but significant nonetheless. We actually see some significant snow over some of the higher ground of Scotland. Now, because it is early on in this cold spell, most likely will predominantly be hills, a couple hundred metres above sea level, but again, you can never rule it out to low-lying areas. Very small differences in the forecast, the upper air temperatures and the timings could be could make all of the difference. Regardless though, that clears through and eventually we see very colder air arriving for August. Once that little system's cleared, it brings a much more direct northerly wind in, and then the very cold air arrives. And you see plenty of snow showers in northern areas, even to low-lying areas there towards Scotland, and potentially some wintry showers pushing inland as well. You can already see a bit of cloud in the west starting to push in. That's perhaps some more persistent precipitation, or at least more convective showers, and that is going to be a real area of interest through Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, as we'll see from the GFS, GEM and ECMWF all building something slightly unstable in that flow, and there is the risk of more widespread snow because of that for areas across maybe even England and Wales next week. And you can see the upper air temperatures, very cold air comes in for all. So regardless of wintriness, it is going to be very cold. You can see the -5 isotherm engulfs everywhere, maybe even the -10 isotherm just getting into Scotland. One thing we must remember when we have a look at the long range runs in a minute is they are not high resolution. The UKV is high resolution, so it pinpoints those temperatures much better. Again, still gets it wrong sometimes, still can be off by a couple of degrees, but compared to the longer range charts we'll see in a minute, this is a lot more accurate. Those runs not really get the -10 isotherm in, but you can see here we do get the -10 isotherm in, just showing you the power of this higher resolution. Those cold air masses still push in here from the UKV. The most important factor for snow is dew points, or that's one of the big limiting factors sometimes with these north or northwesterly winds, is the dew points. And you can see here widely around freezing or below freezing for many northern and eastern areas. And again, this is going to be a real area of interest. See milder dew points to the southwest, that's where we've got more moisture, more milder air. Very cold dew points to the northeast, it's where these combine, that's where we could see persistent wintriness. If you look at the max temperatures, if we do whiz through the next few days, you'll be able to see it's generally around average through Thursday, sort of 8 to 12 degrees. Similar conditions into Friday, a little bit chillier in the far south, maybe a bit of a frost developing during the morning, but again, 8 to 12 degrees. Saturday, though, transition in the north. So low single digits, if not towards freezing, for northern parts of Scotland. But further southwards, still 8 to 12 degrees. Then look what happens into Sunday. About 7-8 degrees overnight, but during the afternoon doesn't rise too much higher, and you see by the evening readily dropping down towards freezing, even across low-lying areas. And you can see by Monday morning much of the British Isles is down towards freezing, so very quickly we plunge towards icy conditions. And you can see by Monday afternoon most areas not getting much above 4 or 5 degrees. Of course, colder for the further northwards and eastwards you go, closer to that source of cold air. And of course, the cold air has been there for longer. So again, it means all of that warmth at the surface, or relative warmth, has dissipated. You can see towards the southwest, it is still 6-7 degrees. Well below average, just not quite as cold as it is further northwards. And of course, as we've said, closer to those warmer sea surface temperatures. And of course, the further south and westwards you go away from the cold source, it is inevitably going to be a little bit milder. But you can see here, even those regions that are traditionally milder are still cold here, 6-7 degrees at best. Now, if you look at the latest GFS today, which is very interesting when it comes to snowfall, and this is because it is cold, if not very cold, but has a much more active jet stream in sort of medium to longer range, which brings in areas of low pressure, bringing the risk of persistent snow and more heavier snowfalls. But it also brings in the risk of milder air masses, and it all turning back to rain or seeing milder conditions persist further southwards. Now, if you look over the next few days, you can see the northerly winds arriving. Again, all runs pretty much get to this position, but you can see already the block towards Greenland's weakened a little bit by Monday, and this allows this little sliding low to develop that the UKV had something developing there, but the GFS really develops this system, sliding it across the UK, heavy snow on its northern edge. In the subsequent days, we see more areas of low pressure developing within the flow, and again would be more areas of heavy snow on its northern and eastern edge. Now, because of the track of the jet stream here and the position of the block, the low pressure systems actually do travel through central regions, which means southern England more likely to see rain, milder temperatures, northern England and Scotland snow. You can see this here, milder temperatures in the south, colder temperatures in the north, and that's what we are seeing from the GFS here. Now, if you're looking at this and thinking, oh, it means I'm not going to see any snow, again, don't take this too literally. These are low resolution runs, and the GM and the ECMWF in a minute are much colder in terms of bringing those colder air masses further southwards. You can see in the subsequent days, it stays pretty blocked and the jet stream stays to our south, more low pressure systems running into that colder air. But one thing that may happen in the longer range is we run out of cold air just because it is November. And you can start to see that here at the end of the run. The -5 isotherm starts to retreat further northwards, and it's simply because that cold air starts to run out as we do lose that direct northerly potentially in the longer range. Sometimes with these sort of patterns, we see cold air moving in, it gets trapped, and all these lows trying to push in could produce snow. But because it's November, we don't quite have the surface conditions to sustain these sort of cold air masses, not like we would have in only a few weeks' time in December. So it does mean there are some caveats and there's some things we need to sort out in the longer term. But those things to worry about in a week's time or so. If you look at the latest GFS, just to run through this, just to show you what this would produce, or that run would produce in terms of precipitation. So you can see wintry showers pushing in early next week, and then that low sliding in off the Atlantic. Heavy snow in northern regions for East Anglia, Northern England, Northern Ireland, into Scotland before clearing. More low pressure systems developing. Again, heavy snow for northern and eastern regions for milder air pushes back in, and then cold air comes back in from the north, and more areas of heavy snow potentially for southern England here as this pushes in. And again, eventually the mild air starts to take over and we lose that widespread risk of snow. So GFS exceptionally wintry here, but pushing in that milder air, it does mean that it becomes much more marginal, and it means that southern regions are much more likely to see rain just because those milder air masses are closer by. But the GM is a lot different in terms of those sort of details, and that's because we've got a much sharper northerly wind here. You can see it stays very cold all the way into early next week, and there's no sign of that low pressure system developing. There is still a system, a little kink in the isobars there, so there is something developing, but it's unlikely to develop into a proper low pressure system with proper milder sector which would produce rain. And that means it stays much colder, maybe not quite as much precipitation around, but more of that precipitation would be snow. And we just stay very cold and northerly wind dominated all the way to day 10. Massive block in the North Atlantic towards Greenland, and it means we stay sustained in terms of cold weather for a full week, full 7 days here from the GM. Again, one caveat we need to watch out for is potentially that cold air running out, but because we keep having that northerly wind pushing in, it doesn't actually run out here. We stay very cold all the way to the end of the run, and again, you see one of these little channel lows developing with a very mild core, and we stay on the cold side, so again, brings the risk of persistent snow, heavy snow, even for southern regions. And by this point, with the cold air being established for such a long period of time, at the surface, we would be very cold. Look at that midday on the 23rd of November, ice days for most of the British Isles. And it just shows you this time of year, because we've got such low sun strength, we've got such short days, these cold air masses persist. It can be one of the coldest periods of the year. Remember, mid-December, that's the winter solstice. So we're not far from having minimum solar energy and from very short days. And all of that combined with the cold air means we can see the perfect storm, really, of very cold conditions. But the caveat we always have is there's not that much cold air available. But the GM pulls it all towards us here. And look at that, midday on the 23rd of November, a week on Saturday, widely below freezing, and overnight, potentially -5 to -10. And you can see multiple ice days potentially developing here. So it is exceptionally cold from the GM. And it would be wintry as well, as we'll see here from the precipitation charts. Again, pretty quickly, you can run through this and see snow is pushing in from the north. A little bit more pessimistic with the precipitation typings here. That is traditional from the GM. That's a pretty typical pattern. But you can see plenty of wintry showers, especially inland. You can see less in the way of persistent snow, and that's just because we stay in that northerly flow, which of course is going to be a little bit drier with less Atlantic weather fronts, but we would be a hell of a lot colder. Snow would stick around, snow would settle, and yeah, could be pretty significant colder spell here from the GM. Now, the ECMWF is kind of in between the GFS and the GM. It's not quite as persistent in terms of cold conditions like the GM is, but it's not as as mild as the GFS is with those big warm sectors, but it's kind of in between snow events, but also very cold conditions. Northern winds pushing in, and you can see low pressure systems developing within that flow, but developing to our south, which means it's developing with the milder air away from us, with the cold air still over the top of us. You can see towards day 10 we stay unsettled, but again we do lose that direct north. If you follow those isobars back, they are coming from the north, but they sort of veer towards Scandinavia. And if we do look at the upper air temperatures, Scandinavia is cold, but it's not very cold, which means we eventually start to run out of cold air by the end of this run. Nonetheless, though, very chilly, and yeah, would be a significant colder spell here from the ECMWF as well, just not quite as cold as the GEM. And if we do compare to the precipitation charts here, again, northerly winds arriving, lots of heavy wintry showers, very on board with that. And you can see most showers here, even towards coastal areas, are actually snow in the north. And you can just see that continues all the way to the end of the run. Lots of heavy snow showers, even kinks in the isobars developing more persistent snow showers all the way to the end of the run. You can see most areas see snow showers at some point, and eventually we lose out on that colder air and more of those showers start to turn back to rain. But a good 3, 4, 5 days here of very cold conditions, potentially significant snow in the south, depending on these areas of low pressure and how close they come, before eventually slowly dissipating away. Very interesting here from the 3 runs today, all very wintry in their own ways. Of course, GFS maybe has the most significant snow, but medals with milder conditions. The GEM probably has the least amount of snow, but it is much colder, much more persistent in that colder conditions. The ECMWF is kind of in between. It is very cold for 3 or 4 days with moderate amount of snow, especially in the form of showers, but it does eventually lose its cold conditions in the longer term. And after you finish by just looking at the ensembles, again, just to see what they're showing you the uncertainty that there is. It's generally around average or above average over the next couple of days, but we plunge below average through the weekend, and it turns, as I said, very cold next week. The GFS here is generally very cold for a good 5, 6, maybe even 7 days, but you can see these little spikes appearing within the ensemble output. And that is where a low pressure system could push in. And this is where we got the runs going back towards average or slightly above average. That is the milder sector moving through. Runs not producing that keep the cold sector and cold air over the top of us. And you can also see they coincide with big precipitation spikes. So put 2 and 2 together, that would mean heavy snow somewhere. Doesn't mean it will be for London, doesn't even mean it will be nearby, but it does mean there will be heavy snow somewhere when we combine cold air with heavy precipitation. Now, again, as we'll see from the ECMWF in a minute, it's not quite the same as this, and that's because it seems as though the GFS is much more on board with a more active jet stream next week, meaning cold air's in place, but low pressure is going to really come up against it, really try and push it away, and that could produce heavy snow, but also could turn it much milder, much faster. And you can see that from a lot more precipitation here, and a lot more uncertainty within those precipitations, with those temperature lines. But if we compare to the ECMWF, for example, you can see much less in the way of those big spikes in temperature, and not quite as high in terms of precipitation, much lower but more frequent, so more convection based. So ECMWF is much colder, much more persistently colder, but then maybe less snow. So again, we'll have to wait and see. The one big thing is though, if we look at Glasgow, for example, look at that, well below average, 5 degrees below average. That's down towards the -5 line or lower, exceptionally cold. And the big way to prove that is look at the 2 meter temperatures hovering just above freezing in the day next week. So yeah, very cold indeed. And we don't usually do this, but let's have a look at the GEM run. And you can see the GEM run is actually within its ensemble suite pretty nicely. It sits well in there and is not really the coldest run here. It's on the colder end, it's just below the ensemble mean, but really it's got a lot of support. And if we look at the 2 meter temperatures, you can see it again, it is one of the coldest runs. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, looks like next week we could be in for a very cold spell, potentially even very wintry as well. And I'll continue to update you with those precipitation and snow charts over the coming days, and hopefully we get a better idea on timings, areas of risk, and of course what could be the severity of any wintriness. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.